John, ever the worksman. Hey, that's great. That wakes people up. Gets them ready. Gets them ready for the Old Testament, which is going to be fresh and new today. Good evening. Glad you are here. Come in, make your way inside. Grab a handout. They are up there. I really got to figure out a better way to say that. That just sounds like I'm giving away money. There's just a real negative connotation to handout, you know. Grab a study guide. Yeah, grab a notes page. That's really kind of what they are. They're not really a study guide either. Because if you... Then the outline. There it is. The outline. He's nailed it. The outline. Grab an outline. Glad you are making your way inside to this warm and muggy summer morning, summer evening. What am I saying? I apparently need coffee. We are going to pick up right where we left off last week. And I kind of changed gears a little bit on us. Had a different plan than what ended up on the page. And let me explain, since I know you're dying to know. I have 3 kids that go to the daycare after school here. And one of them has a propensity to eat a lot of junk food and then throw up. And that happened at about 6 o'clock tonight when I was starting to get everything together. And so that took a little bit of time out of my evening. And what I was originally intending on doing is covering Song of Songs and then jumping into the prophets in the order that they happen chronologically, like time-wise, right? That was my goal, because I think that's a helpful way of seeing how the prophets unfold, which means that you don't really have this major-minor prophet distinction, but you just have the prophets in sort of descending order all the way down to Malachi, which is the last one, which takes place right before the so-called 400 years of silence leading up to the Gospels. However, I did not have time to adequately organize this in that manner, and so tonight we're just going to cover Isaiah after Song of Songs, because it's one of my favorite ones to begin with. And otherwise it was going to be like Amos and Obadiah and Hosea. And I just, you know.
We're still not ready for Amos.
You're not ready for Amos. You had a whole verse-by-verse study through Amos. You're not ready to go back there yet. And I think Isaiah has some fun things to talk about as well. But we got to get to Song of Songs, through Song of Songs before we get to that. We didn't even start it last week because we spent so much time on the Psalms, which I'm not mad about at all. I thought that was a really great time together. If you didn't see that, those of you online or those of you here that weren't here, go online. Last week's session is up. Just for those of you who are interested in going back and watching, if you miss any, these go online as soon as and right during while we're doing this right now. They're going online. They never leave. We live stream it, and then they're just captured and they're there. And so that's a helpful. You have to fast forward like 5 or 10 minutes normally, because we start streaming before obviously the class begins. But have no fear, you will eventually get to it. Song of Song. Any questions before we begin? Let's do that. Yeah.
You had mentioned that you planned on doing all of the prophets in chronological order.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't they that way in the Bible?
Yeah, it's a great question. Why aren't they that way in the Bible? I mean, if we're being honest, we could ask that question about a lot of things, right? I mean, why is 1st and 2nd Samuel broken up into 2 books? Why are Kings and Chronicles broken up the way they are? I mean, there's a lot of little choices that are made that way. My intuition is that it has to do with major and minor prophecy. You get the majors up front, you get the minors at the end, which is just a really bad way of building drama as well. Like, if you want someone to read to the end, you save the big things for last, right? Not Obadiah and Malachi. I'm just kidding, I shouldn't say that. Those are good books of the Bible. All scripture is breathed out by God. That's why there's a distinction between major and minor prophets. And There is probably some other tradition that has very little real meaning as an answer. Someone just decided to do it, is probably my guess. Why do we have chapters and verses, right? Someone decided that would be helpful. And I agree, it is helpful. It's nice. But it's not in the original text. Any other questions before we jump in? Good. I like how we're still acting like we're in the middle of a pandemic. You guys could not be more further spread out. It's fine. It's no big deal. It's not a big deal at all. I will say, let me do this up front as well before we really dive into it, in case you missed it. Don't do it twice if you did it Sunday, but there are some forms on the seats from Sunday, and that will also be here this coming Sunday for elder affirmation and budget affirmation. If you are a member of City on a Hill and have not filled one of those out, please do so, because that's your duty as a member. Great, yeah. Elder in the back is, yeah, what? How, you don't know any of those people before? Is that what you said? Right, that's a good question. How are you? So you bring up actually a very, very helpful question. I did not set this up, but this is good. So there's two philosophies that one can have that I think are fine, okay? The first one is a little bit more on the skeptical side, which is by nature who I am, although I've overcome it in a lot of ways, where you could write that you are a member, write whether or not you affirm the budget changes, and then for the people who we are asking you to affirm as elders, you could leave them blank and write a note next to each of them that says, I don't know these people and can't in good conscience affirm them. That's the first one. The second, and the philosophy that I personally take with this, even though I can't really take it in the position that I'm in now, but that I would take, I'm certain of, if I were not the senior pastor of the church, is to trust that the due diligence that's been done by the current elders has been done in such a way where we are calling for affirmations for guys that we really believe are truly qualified. So just as a rundown of how this works is these are not names we come up with. These are names that are written in. If you remember back a few weeks ago, we had cards out where you were able to nominate people according to the qualifications in Titus and Timothy. We take those names over a two-week period, and I compile them down. If people get multiple votes, I put that on the sheet that we have. And then in our elders meeting, we look through those names, and we make a order of priority, typically from 1 to 4. Now, there were I think 17 names that were putting down. There was a lot. Putting down. That's how bad my talking is tonight. But we go in 1 through 4 in terms of priority, and that priority is based on a couple of things. One, what we know about them, and most of the time there are at least a good group of us in the room who are pretty familiar with these individuals. If you're being nominated for an elder, you're not somebody probably that's flown under the radar from all of us. And then 2, I do a little bit of background work with some of the other pastoral staff. So if they're a guy, Brian Duncan, well, they're all guys. I go to Brian Duncan. I go to Chris. I've gone to Kelsey for some of them. People that I know have had more in-depth, one-on-one kind of life work with them that might know some things that not general people would know, but that would probably disqualify them from eldership at this point. And that's not to go around, that's the part of the process, right? That's how we know what we're getting into. And so once we have some green lights on those names, the elders gather, we look at those, we prioritize them. I do 1 through 4 because there have been times in the past where I've called maybe the 1 or 2, because we only nominate 2 a year. And they say, hey, I'm really honored by that, but with my work schedule or with whatever other life things are going on, I don't feel like I can commit to that commitment right now. And we respect that. I mean, that's a very honest, transparent way of doing that. And then that gives me 1 or 2 other names that I can fall back on without having to regather with the elders and select more people. So at the end of the day, to answer your question, I think some of it is just kind of a trust in the elder-led model. I mean, that is why we are elder-led to begin with. A, because it's what Paul commands in the New Testament, but B, because it takes away the need for these sort of like big and sometimes potentially divisive decisions, right? And so even with like major propositions, hiring, purchasing of real estate, I think is one of the things our bylaws states. When we come with an elder recommended decision, what we're essentially saying is, hey, the people that you have entrusted to lead this church in a godly manner think that this is a good idea. And so then for people to come back and go, no, I don't think that's a good idea, is like intuitively backwards from what the model is supposed to do. So there's a little bit of, I think, a trust factor that goes into that. There's a trust factor that goes into it from even people that you do know, because chances are you don't know everything about that person. And so you are a little bit leaning on us to do that work as well before we give the green light. So is that sufficient answer-ish? But the first one is more than acceptable. I mean, we had two people, actually one person, because the other one was a mistake, did not affirm one of them, and then just wrote a note on the side like, I don't even know who this person is. And I'm fine with that. Like, I do think that is, I can understand the position. I think it misses the point a little bit, but it's a fine response. At least it says, like, I'm not affirming them because I think they're a horrible candidate. You know, it just gives some clarification for us on our end. And just so you guys are aware, if you put your name down and you pass the card in and it goes to the appropriate place, which then gets to me, and I'm saying that because if you leave it on a seat or something and it falls on the floor and we don't get it, then I can't fix that. But the ones that I got in, I had another member of the church check his name, write his name in, I'm a member, and then he didn't affirm anything. And so I was like, well, crap, is that like, and he's like one of the gentlest and like nicest men I know. He's a former elder. And so I called him and was like, hey, I was going to talk to you about the elder forms. And he was like, yeah, what's up? And I said, you checked your name, you're a member? Mm-hmm. I said, and then you didn't check anything else? And he started laughing. He goes, that was just total brain fart. He's like, yeah, I affirm all of it. I'm sorry. And so, but if you don't check a box, you can expect a call from me. And again, that's not to hound you. I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm not trying to like get you to get the vote. That's not how this works. We're not voting. If less than like 97% of the body does not affirm, we go back to the drawing board. That's not a number that's in our bylaws. That's just kind of how we operate. Because I don't want to roll something out that, 65-35, right? It passed. That means 35% of our church is hacked off that we're doing something. That's horrible leadership. It's not a good idea. So I'm going to call because I want to know what your thoughts were on that and why you didn't think that this person was a good affirmation. And if it's simply, I just don't know him, then I'm going to say, okay, cool, we're probably going to proceed, assuming there are no other major hiccups. I've never had someone go like, well, they have a deep, dark secret that you don't know about. But again, if that's the case, I want to know about that. That's why I say these phone calls are important. It's not to pressure or hound. It's really just to get information. Keep a spirit of transparency. So, cool? Yeah? Good. That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that because I suspect that's something that other people have thought, and certainly this is information that I've never really fully laid out, and not at least in this level. So I think that is a very helpful thing to throw down here. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Just a suggestion. I think it would be helpful because I didn't know either. I almost did the same things like but I know you trust the process, and I went through that whole mental thing. But even if you threw a picture up, then at least I can
Put a face to a name.
Yeah.
That is a good idea. We can do that on Sunday. Because we're going to do, we have, our bylaws state we have to do that for 2 weeks. And so when I do this again during the welcome on Sunday, we can put a picture of each of them up. I will also say something that I began last year that is going to be an annual thing from this point forward is we'll do an elder commissioning service. I say last year, that was like in March because the pandemic threw everything off. But typically that'll happen in January. January 9th is when that's happening for the next one. And so Michael Samuels and Marcus Daugherty are rolling off of the elder board. They've served their 3 years, and assuming, again, we don't have any unforeseen changes, Robert Mangano and Mitch Hendon will come on. And so on the 9th, during the welcome, both services, we'll call Mike and Marcus up. We'll pray over them. We'll, as a church, thank them, just recognize them for their service as elders. And then we'll call Mitch and Robert up. We'll pray over them and kind of welcome them in and ask for God to give them wisdom as they help lead this body. And I will say, man, with Mike and Marcus, we talked about this. We met on Monday. It was their last meeting together, and we talked about the things that they were a part of as elders here. And it was the purchase of Refuge Ranch, the hiring of Kelsey Barker as our worship pastor, the hiring of Aaron Nelson as a full-time youth minister, a pandemic where we had to make all kinds of crazy decisions. I mean, they were really integral during some really interesting moments. And so we owe them a great deal of gratitude for their participation in all of that. So yeah, great question. We'll see if we can throw some pictures. You want to jump on that, Kels? Or just make a note so that we don't forget that picture for Sunday. That is a good idea. That's an easy little fix. Any other questions before we talk about sex? Yeah. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. What? Say. Please. Please do send some pictures of Robert. We would love that. That would be great. Let's talk about the Song of Songs, which, spoiler alert, does have some heing and sheeing in it. So your Bibles probably say something like the Song of Solomon. Who has the Song of Songs in their Bible? Yeah, one. One Bible. Wow. How we have failed. It's fine. Song of Solomon is it's fine. But let's talk about why I don't think it's Solomon. That's the author. Let's do that for a moment because it's important. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Now, that might seem like pretty slam dunk. Solomon wrote this, right? Here's the interesting thing about Solomon as an author or as a figure in Old Testament literature. There is a very strong tradition in Jewish thought, Jewish literature, Jewish wisdom tradition, that you are in the school of Solomon, or in the thought of, like the line of Solomon, and the way that you think and put forth wisdom. Solomon is, as we know, or was, as we know, he's dead now, the wisest person who has ever lived. He asks God for wisdom, and God gives him wisdom such that he is wiser than any man who has ever lived in the world. And remember, we talked about that, however many weeks ago that was, that shockingly, and I mean that in every sense of the way, his tremendous amount of wisdom did approximately nothing for him in terms of making good and bad decisions. He makes loads of bad decisions. So let's don't put him too high on a pedestal. But he is seen as the sort of father of wisdom in Jewish wisdom tradition. And so it is not uncommon to find things written that are wisdom-oriented in Solomon, or according to Solomon, or however it is phrased. And this would be one of the ways that we see that, which is Solomon's. It doesn't necessarily mean that Solomon is the one who wrote it. It means that it is in line with the type of wisdom that Solomon would portray. So that's one way of explaining how verse 1 can say that, and then us not think that it is Solomon that wrote it. But more importantly, let's use context clues, if we will, for a moment, and think logically. Now, I'm not a big fan of just apply logic to every part of the Bible. There are a lot of highly illogical things that take place that are just supernatural, and we can't explain them away with logic. But I think this is one of them where logic applies. What do we know about Solomon in terms of his many what? Wives and concubines. A lot of them. Over 1,000 of them. The man had a problem. There's a group for that. And Solomon could have used it. So it seems strange for a man interested in that many women to write a whole work on being about one woman, which is very much about how this book reads. It is about a male and a female who are so in love with one another and never want to be apart from one another and never want to leave one another's side. And they awake in the morning and, where is my lover? And I yearn for my lover. And oh, there he is. Oh, there she is. And I just hope that I will never be departed from my lover. This doesn't sound like a man who has 12,000 or 1,200 women in his life. It just doesn't. I'm not buying that. And certainly, she's not buying that. Well, I mean, way more importantly, she's reading this and like, he's a liar. He does not actually feel this way, right? So, I think that the author is likely unknown, but that it follows the Solomon wisdom tradition. If you are uncomfortable with that and you think, no, my Bible says the Song of Solomon, then that's fine. The reality is, it actually doesn't really matter whether it was Solomon or not, because it's not making a hard and fast claim. It doesn't say, I, Solomon, wrote these words with my own hand. If it said that, we'd be having a different conversation right now. But it doesn't say that. The terms, the wording is a little bit ambiguous and very much in line with a literary custom of this time. And so I think that, and given the context clues, I'm comfortable with saying probably someone different. When is it written? Again, unknown, but I mean, we do know something, right? It was either at least during Solomon's life or after. Certainly wasn't before. Themes of this book are intense desire, the joy of physical attraction, and the beauty and the danger of love. The beauty and the danger of love. And there are both in this little book. Some notes, just some thoughts on this before we jump in. Song of Songs has been interpreted very, very differently depending on what year you are in. So as of late, and I mean really in the last probably, I don't know, I didn't actually go that far back, but at least the last probably 50 to 100 years, Song of Songs has taken on a very strong sexual motif. So typically, what it is boiled down to is just a book about sexual relationships between a man and a woman. I think that's a little oversimplified, if you want my honest opinion. I think there has been actually some damage done in like really overemphasizing that aspect of it. But there have been a lot of other interpretations. In the original text, he and she titles were not a part of the original text. So what I mean by that is that when you look at yours, you have like in chapter 1, probably a she over verse 2, as if she is talking. And then you have as if he is talking in verse 8, so on and so forth. Those are additional edits that are put into this to help the reader understand who is speaking if, and that's a big if, it is actually those people speaking. So I'm a little timid about putting those kinds of things in and really like putting a lot of weight in that because it's not a part of the original text. To interpret it allegorically can be pretty problematic. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's look at the three interpretations here, and I'll show you what I mean by the allegorical. The Jewish tradition, so predating the Bible, it was often seen as an allegory of Israel and God. So Israel and Yahweh. Israel is the woman, God is the man, and again, you have to sort of look at this allegorically as if these are not talking about literally Israel and God in a love relationship, but in the same way that a love relationship takes place, the same kind of A to A, B to B corresponding parts apply in this bigger relationship. Of course, when you get into Christian thought, the church does this as well. Christ and the church are the new major figures in this book. And here is why allegory can do a little, some strange things. Song of Songs 113. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-gedi. Cyril, one of the early church fathers, interpreted in his landmark commentary on Song of Songs, verse 13 of chapter 1, he interpreted it this way. The sachet of myrrh is Christ, Jesus himself, draped between two breasts which represent the old and the new covenants. Christ is bridging the gap between the old and the new. Now, apart from this conjuring an extraordinarily uncomfortable image, that's almost certainly not what this was meant. Right? I mean, like, can we agree on that? There's almost no way. I'm going to say almost because, look, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but that is a very strange way of looking at this verse. I think the best way of interpreting it is just reflections on the divine gift of love. When we look at other ancient Near Eastern cultures, particularly Egypt and Babylon, we find a lot of documents written on love, attraction, and physical pleasure. And so it tells scholars that this was a common thing in this part of the world at this time. Not that everything should be based on other cultures, but it gives us a snapshot of what was probably happening in the world during that time. And thus, Song of Songs interpreted in that light makes it a lot more straightforward. It's just about the beauty of the divine gift of love. The he and the she are really kind of irrelevant. We don't need to know who they are. They're just a he and a she who are in love. And they stand for any two people who fall in love and experience this divine gift that God gives. Any questions so far before we jump in? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ever? Here we go.
So for every other book of the Bible, you tell us that we need to listen to like the earliest audience and how they would have understood it.
Yeah.
And so if we're seeing the Jewish audience understood it allegorically, why are you listening to the heathens?
That's a good question. So
Thank you.
By the Jewish tradition, what I mean by that is long after this is written. And again, there are probably some cultural reasons, and certainly there's nothing wrong with the...
I'm not arguing for...
No. Yeah.
It's just a weird...
It is, and it's a good question. So certainly there are some connections. I think in anything we learn about love between Christ and the church, especially. I mean, Paul makes that connection in Ephesians 5, right? That the husband and the wife represent or demonstrate something about the nature of the relationship between Christ and the church. So there's no question that we can make some comparisons, or probably more accurately, applications to this relationship. But the reason why I bring up these other cultures is because these cultures date back to the period in which we think this was probably written. And we have nothing from this time interpreting Song of Songs. The Jewish traditions come way after that, 200, 100 BC, several hundred years after this would have taken place. So we're kind of, again, leveraging ourselves on many, many hundreds of years after the fact. And so it's important to go back to source time and region to ask the question, is this, because before this, it was thought that writing about attraction and things of this nature were like very taboo and not talked about. And yet what we find in that region is actually the exact opposite. So it gives a little stronger argument for that. Yeah, good question. Yeah, hold on. Let's throw it. Here we go. We're going overhand. It's happening. Look at it, man. Amazing.
I did have a quick question. I have taken classes on this before, and can you speak a little bit to why you don't think the sexual motifs are, the reason for this writing? Because I've had it, interpreted that it's all about sexual motifs, and, especially in the church, that being very sexualized, can be used as an excuse for, like, sexual abuse within marriage relationships.
Yes.
So can you just give some background on that and why you think that way?
Well, exactly what you just said is why I said what I said. So I don't think that there is no sexual motif in it. I absolutely do. But I like to think of this more on the terms of divine love and not purely sex. Because when you talk about that from a purely sexual standpoint, it gives license for more carnal behavior that's not intended. And I do believe that sexual attraction, sexual relationship is a gift. It's a good gift God gives for men and women in a committed, monogamous marriage relationship. It's a way of exploring intimacy. It's a way of being known. And it is something that we are meant to enjoy. Beyond that, obviously, there's the whole Genesis command to be fruitful, multiply. Can't really do that without a sexual relationship. But I do think that it is meant for more than that. I think the kind of like old fundamental Baptist, like sex only for procreation thought process is not clearly in line with something like Song of Songs that tells us that there is an enjoyment that we are supposed to find in this very unique, one-of-a-kind relationship that we attach ourselves to in this life. So, yes, I do think that it has sexual motif to it. But I've seen churches like Mars Hill. If you've listened to the rise and fall of Mars Hill, then you get a pretty big sample size of some of the things that Driscoll was doing. And you know, he's highlighted because of the size of their church. There are a lot of churches not as big as Mars Hill that are doing just as much, if not more of that, where there's this sort of burden typically placed on the woman to do whatever the man wants or fantasizes about in the name of Song of Songs. And that is abuse. It can be abuse. It most often is abuse, I'll put it that way. And so I think it's more of a probably semantic thing, but it's an important semantic thing to talk about it on the grounds of love, which is mutually sacrificial and also mutually respectful of boundaries rather than just simple physical pleasure. Yeah, great question. Really great question. You just keep the box over there. And anyone else have questions before we continue on? All right. Well, it's funny. I mean, I spent probably more time talking about Song of Songs than we're actually going to go through it. But we will go through some of these. We're going to jump all the way to chapter 6, though. So, again, let me just preface this by saying that most of these chapters are these sort of scenes where this man and this woman who clearly are in love with one another want nothing more than just to be together. And I don't mean even necessarily just sexually, but just in the presence of one another. They long for one another. They wake up in the morning and their lover is nowhere to be found. And where are they? And there's like this pining and longing for, and when am I going to see this person again? And I think that is demonstrating something about the gift of love. Love is not an indifferent, cold mechanism that we just like choose to do. Like there is a sense of excitement and enjoyment and I don't know what the word is. There's like an intensity to it, right? That these two individuals are experiencing. And so that's a lot of this. And there's a lot of imagery here that is very strange, one of which we're going to look at in chapter 6, verses 4 through 10. This is what allegedly he is saying. I think we can agree on this one. Ladies, and just tell me, imagine for a moment that the love of your life has come to confess his love to you. These are his words. You are beautiful as Tirzah, my love, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. Turn away your eyes from me, for they overwhelm me. Why? Your hair is like a flock of goats, leaping down the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of ewes that have come up from the washing. All of them bear twins. Not one among them has lost its young. Praise the Lord. Your cheeks are like halves of pomegranate behind your veil. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, pure to her who bore her. The young women saw her and called her blessed. Okay, that's good. The queens and concubines also, and they praised her. A little weird, but still good. Who is this who looks down like the dawn, beautiful as the moon, bright as the sun, nice, awesome as an army with banners, back to bad? What in the world is going on here? Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And they're in love. So here's the thing. Jewish poetry is not meant in the same way as English poetry. English poetry is supposed to conjure imagery when we utilize it, right? It's a very image-driven way of communicating. So when you say something like, your eyes are like blank, the idea there is to make whoever you're speaking to imagine your eyes literally being like the thing you're about to describe. So if you were to say, like, your eyes are like the sun, I mean, that's a little strange, but it would mean like they're beaming, right? They're glowing. Well, that's a good thing. That's nice. If you were to say, I don't even know, I can't even do it because it's so, your teeth are like pearls. How about that? Pearly white, right? Again, I don't know any time when commenting on a woman's teeth is a loving thing to do, but let's just pretend it is. Your teeth are like pearls. Again, there's something conjured in your mind. There's imagery that is brought forth in your mind. When you say things like, your teeth are like a flock of ewes that have come up from washing, that conjures a very strange picture in your mind that would leave a woman feeling very confused as to why you just said that. I'm not a woman, but am I right about that? Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I thought I was probably at least right about that one. So what is it doing then? What is the imagery intended, or not imagery? What are these words intended to communicate? These are all things that are important to society at this time, right? Livestock, very important. Armies with banners, that's big and impressive. Typically means they're winning. These are things that matter to the ancient person in terms of their community. And so it's not that you're saying literally your teeth are like ewes that have just come out of the river. But it's that like your teeth are like something that is extraordinarily valuable and meaningful in our society. In other words, it's ascribing value to this person, not really trying to conjure imagery. It would be interesting, though, men, just proceed with caution, but to write your wife or significant other, little love notes right out of Song of Songs, and just see how it works. I mean, I'm just curious more from an experiment side. Write these things down verse by verse and slip them in her journal or in her purse or whatever, and imagine the surprise that she gets when she's like, turn away your eyes from me, they overwhelm me. I don't know, it's wild. Any questions so far on this one? Yes, you want to throw the box back?
Well, I was just going to say that the teeth, you don't want to kiss somebody that's got yucky teeth.
Okay. No, I agree with
So
that.
that's a compliment
Yeah.
if your teeth are...
Sure. No, yeah, and it's a great point.
And I know that's just not what it means.
I'm just
but
saying,
still.
like, if you're making your move as the guy, probably, like, teeth isn't probably where you're going, right? Like, I agree. I think teeth are a good thing, and good teeth are great. But if you're trying to, like, win the love of someone, I don't know that I'm complimenting teeth. I've certainly never been like, Jess, your teeth are just, I don't know. Never even commented on it. Chapter 7, verse 1. Let's look at the enjoyment of love. So this is really where this sort of physical traction piece comes into play, right? How beautiful are your feet in sandals, O noble daughter. A little weird, right? But your rounded thighs are like jewels, the work of a master hand. Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat. Not sure about that one.
Also, why belly?
Stomach. It may be a translation thing. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. It just seems like she has a really long neck. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon and the gate of Beth Rabbin. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon, which looks toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel, and your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in the tresses. How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. If you keep reading, there's a little bit more about her breasts, about her, well, there's a lot more about it actually. The scent of her breath is like apples, that's good. The point of this is that there's an enjoyment, there's a physical enjoyment aspect. And I don't think we need to apologize about that, right? I think that this is one of those things that the church has historically done a pretty bad job of, because either the way these things are communicated is like, we don't talk about this isn't good, sex isn't meant to be enjoyed, it's a task that you have to do to populate the world, and we get very uncomfortable, and so let's don't talk about it. Or it's like doubled down, and we move into the territory of what we were just talking about, where it becomes only about that, and it becomes actually quite damaging. So I think finding that balance, right? There's a really incredible balance that needs to be found in the church, where we value love for what it is. It is love. That is the goal. That is the means that we are seeking. And that encapsulated in love is a whole host of experiences, one of which is a physical enjoyment of one another. And that's a good thing. It's a thing that God designed for the man and the woman to enjoy. There are enjoyment nerves throughout the human body, right? This is not accidental. And so it's an important thing that we recognize, but that we don't overemphasize either. And certainly within our world's kind of cultural context, the view of sex is in desperate need of reconstruction from a Christian perspective, because there's a lot of really bad stuff out there. Yeah, reconstruction. You like that? So, what was the other thing I was going to say? The other thing I was going to say is this, that I think that this type of relationship becomes a lot more important and weighty when you couch it in the way that a woman in this time would have presented herself. In the ancient world, you covered a lot of your body, a lot of yourself. This is a means of modesty. It's very cultural, but I think there's some actual, like, really practical aspects of it as well. You see Muslim cultures do this still. Sikh cultures do this. And then even other ancient, not ancient, but modern Near Eastern and Middle Eastern cultures do this as well. Even Christian women in these countries wear attire that is very covering. And I remember when I was in college at UTA, there was a girl in one of my classes that was a Christian, but was confused a lot of the times as a Muslim, because she came out of a Muslim family, but her family converted, which is in and of itself remarkable. And yet she continued to cover with head covering and everything. And we were talking about it one day in this group, and I asked her, out of curiosity, why do you still wear that? Because my thought was that is a strictly Muslim thing. And she said, no, it's just a means of modesty from where I live. And modesty is a value that was really instilled in me, and I don't wear it all the time. And when I get married, there will be times in the home with my husband where he will see parts of me that no one else will. And I thought, that's kind of awesome. Again, I think you can go too far with that. But my point is that the physical enjoyment of your partner in this especially culture and time was a pretty unique, intimate, and very, very special relationship that only your other half got to enjoy with you. And I think that only heightens the specialness of the relationship. Any questions before we continue? We got one more. The conclusion. Chapter 8, verses 6 through 14. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of Yahweh. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. that was really it, 6 and 7. There's some kind of contradicting imagery here, right? There's some, not contradicting, but contrasting is a better way of thinking about it. This is really setting on display both the beauty and the danger of love. Love is as strong as death. It is a force that can be compared with nothing more than death itself. Many waters cannot quench it, but also floods can't drown it. So you have on one hand the imagery of drinking to be quenched of thirst, and then on the other hand you have these flash floods that kill and bring destruction. There's this sort of contrasting imagery all throughout these two verses that I think really put on full display the power of love, that it is both invigorating and terrifying, that it is both capable of incredible blessing and great destruction. It's a very, very powerful thing that God gives us. One closing story from Song of Songs, and then we will move on. There was a person that I know, I will not mention names, that at one time in youth group came to a youth gathering. It was actually in church, but the youth sat in one section of the church. It was not this church. And they had just come and were sitting down, and they were picking out, I'm trying to remember how the story goes. I think they were like picking out life verses or something for one another, verses that describe a person. And the whole youth group kind of started snickering, some of her friends, and they had written hers down on a piece of paper. And so she gets the paper and opens it up, and it says Proverbs 8:8. And so she opens her Bible to say, what does it say? And she reads, "We have a little sister, and she has no breasts." It was a cheap laugh, but I thought it was funny. She took it. It was okay. It wasn't making fun of her. It was a joke. But every time I get to that verse, I think of that story. I think it's really shows the profound immaturity of junior high kids, right? And any closing thoughts, questions on this one? I'm sorry, Song of Songs 8:8, not Proverbs. I misspoke.
I was about to ask what the heck is in Proverbs.
Yeah. Song of Songs 8:8, correct. No other thoughts? All right. Let's move to Isaiah, which incidentally is going to be right after Song of Songs. Very helpful. Who wrote Isaiah? Isaiah. How do we know? Yeah, because it says the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Now, pause for a moment. Yes, so it doesn't say that he wrote it. It says that this was his vision. And so I have Isaiah and company. It is accepted in tradition that Isaiah wrote this. There's not a lot of contention about that in early tradition. In late tradition, let me just say this up front in case you go online and are like, who wrote 1 Corinthians? Part of the movement that began in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, called the Higher Critical Movement, came out of Germany, and the likes of, there's actually several of them, several German theologians, scholars, so-called scholars, they're scholars, so-called Christians, I'll put it that way, who developed this idea of viewing the Bible like any other literary device and interpreting it likewise in light of modernity and some of the things they knew. And so what it often meant was sort of stripping away any supernatural activity and trying to understand what actually happened. So for example, when Moses split the Red Sea, they would say we didn't really split the Red Sea. They just traveled through a very shallow part of the sea, because you can't split a sea. That's not possible, right? Science tells us that. Of course, it's also hard to imagine how an entire Egyptian army could drown in like 2 feet of water, but I'm sure they have an explanation for that. But this higher critical movement develops this ultimate skepticism regarding things that get down to the very like linguistic problems. So some scholars will say that, Paul wrote this book, but not this book, because the writing is different in this book than it is in this book. It doesn't look like his style. To which I would say the same could be true or said of C.S. Lewis with regard to several of his works, right? Depending on what he's writing and what time he was writing in, he wrote over a long course of time. Writers' habits change. The way that they write, their technique changes. Beyond that, Paul deals with things in certain letters that he doesn't deal with in other letters. So it would cause him to use certain words maybe he had no use of using in other parts. And so you can find an argument probably at this point for any book of the Bible not being written who we think almost certainly wrote it. I say that to say that we think Isaiah wrote at least a large portion of this. Maybe there were scribes involved. Maybe there was a later tradition of recording things that happened that were added into this. But by and large, we'll say Isaiah and company. Unique features. He addresses current and future audiences. So Isaiah understands that not everything he is prophesying has to do with his time, which is pretty interesting. It's kind of a unique aspect of his book. There is a Cyrus reference that we're going to talk about when we get there. We've talked about Cyrus already. We had that talk already. The so-called non-Christian king who is going to redeem God's people, and our propensity in our modern times to apply that title to virtually any political figure who stands to benefit the Christian community. Cyrus in the flesh. No, Cyrus is dead. The audience is Judah, exiled Jews, and post-exilic Jews. Why do I include all of those people? Anyone want to take a guess? Huh? Because the Bible's forever one. Yes, that is a perfectly acceptable answer. There's prophecy in it, certainly, for post-exilic Jews, yes, but I'll just go ahead and give you the answer. It's because Isaiah lived a really long time, and he prophesied to Judah, but also during the exile. So he's just around and had a lot of experiences. So yeah, some of his audience changed because his context changed a little bit. Isaiah 2:2. Take a look. Start in verse 1. The word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be lifted up above the hills. All the nations shall flow to it, and many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So this is what I have written down here is eschatological imagery. This is a big word. If you learn this, you'll impress all your friends in other Bible studies. Eschatological, it's something that refers to the end things, the study of or the system of theology known as eschatology deals with end time events, the last things, if you will. This one in particular is likely an allusion to Revelation 21, verses 9 and 11. If you want to go there, you can, or I will read it. Either way is fine. Then came one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls full of the 7 last plagues and spoke to me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. That's the church. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, its radiance like a most rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. Kind of interesting that Isaiah looks to this time when in the latter days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established on the highest mountain. And in Revelation, we see that same imagery being described. A really cool little quick one for us to take a look at. Now, you'll notice the next three are one of my favorite games: Jesus, not Jesus, or Jesus and not Jesus. It's a game we play where you decide what is being described is about Jesus, not Jesus, or both. I love this game. Isaiah 7:14 is the first one. And we'll go back to, verse 10. Looks like a good place to start. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask a sign of the Lord, your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, and I will not put the Lord to the test. And he said, Hear then, O house of David. Is it too little for you to weary men, that you weary my God also? I love that, just low-key slap in the face, right? Verse 14, Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Jesus, not Jesus, or Jesus and not Jesus. Let's do a show of hands. Jesus. First, raise your hand. Jesus, okay? Secondly, not Jesus. Oh, no, not Jesus. We're faithful people. Jesus and not Jesus. Raise your hands. Okay, good. So, this one is actually Jesus and not Jesus. Jesus and not Jesus. Now, let me explain why. We got to go to a little more of this passage, and then we got to look at the next chapter to figure this out. So, up to this point, it seems pretty straightforward. A virgin will conceive. You're going to call him Emmanuel. That seems like a slam dunk. But keep reading. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. That is, by the way, Jerusalem and Ephraim, which is Samaria. Let's see here. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. So a virgin's going to conceive. She's going to bear a son. You're going to call him Emmanuel, which, by the way, means what? God with us. And here's what's going to happen. Before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, which is, so he's young. This is just a couple years after the boy is born at most. The land whose two kings you dread, which if you read Isaiah 7 in its context, that's the whole point of this, is that Pekah and Rezin, kings of Syria, which is Syria and Israel, they're called different things, Ephraim and Samaria and other places. They are at odds with Ahaz. They are about ready to go to war with him because they are concerned that Assyria is coming to attack and that they all need to team up and fight against them. And Ahaz refuses. And so the prophecy says that this boy is going to be born, and when he's really young, both Pekah and Rezin are going to be destroyed. Now, again, newsflash, this takes place very soon after this prophecy is made, and this is a solid 800 years before Jesus is born. So almost certainly we know right off the bat there's more at play than just Jesus, right? But then we get to verse 8, and what we find out is that there is immediate fulfillment of this particular prophecy. If you look at, we'll go on verse 16 of chapter 8. It says, Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel from the Lord of hosts. These are a sign. What did he say? A sign will be given to you. Now, by the way, this child's name, who is Isaiah's son, Isaiah has a son named Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. This is in verse 1 up top. He becomes the sign for these individuals who this prophecy is given to, Ahaz and Judah. Now the question becomes, of course, how is it that a virgin can conceive and bear a son and be called Emmanuel and it not be Jesus? Thought Jesus was the only virgin birth. Yeah. Exactly. In the Old Testament, virgin was a word that did not mean a virgin in the way that we understand it. It was just an unmarried, a woman who had never had a child. An unmarried woman who had never had a child, or a young married but not yet given birth to child woman. She was a virgin in that sense. That's what the Hebrew word means in this passage. Now, we get to Matthew chapter 1, which is certainly where the Jesus votes are coming from. Matthew 1, the birth narrative, Mary is visited by the angel that we find out in Luke is Gabriel, and she is told that you will, actually it's Joseph who is visited at that point. He is told that all of the things that Mary was experiencing took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, and then he quotes Isaiah 7:14. So this brings up one of my favorite words that we've talked about many times over so far, typology. Yes, typology. And there are three big rules for typological fulfillment. To understand whether or not something is typological in the New Testament, there are three qualifiers that I like to follow that are very helpful, I think, in understanding this. So one, the Old Testament has to prefigure the New Testament. In other words, the Old Testament has to demonstrate something that the New Testament is going to look back on. It can't just be like typological about some random unmentioned thing. There's got to be an anchor point in the Old Testament for it to point back to. In this case, Matthew says all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, pointing us back to Isaiah 7:14. Two, there has to be escalation. So the idea that you have a virgin, but it doesn't really mean a virgin in Hebrew. But by the time you get to Greek, the word in Greek for virgin means literal virgin. We see kind of an escalating pattern here. Here it's just an unmarried, unchild rearing woman. Here it's a literal virgin. Here we have a Emmanuel, God with us, in the sense that God's presence is with us and going before us in battle. Here we have God's literal presence with us in the flesh, in this child, Jesus, right? There is escalation that takes place. Three, I forget the rule. It's really besides the point. We'll do a typology class when we get to it. The point is that there is, we should. The point is that this is one of those passages that has a both and fulfillment to it. The word that that Matthew uses in Matthew 1:21, it's the Greek word plerao, and it's a word that means a full, F-U-L-L, filling. So you have the idea that something is already kind of full, but now it's being completely filled, which makes sense with regard to the kind of prophetic fulfillment that's taking place. This cup is already halfway full. It took place in Isaiah chapter 8, when Emmanuel was born, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. But it's fully full in Matthew 1 when Jesus comes. Questions on that one? I remember what the third rule was. I remember what it was now. So the Old Testament has to prefigure that moment, but secondly, the New Testament has to specifically reference it. So the reason that's important, and I've talked about this before, is the character Joseph in Genesis is often, you'll see preachers do this like Joseph was a type of Christ, and they'll talk about all the ways in which he is like a prefiguring of Christ. The biggest problem that I have with doing something like that is that the New Testament never explicitly connects Jesus to Joseph. You never get that. You never get the apostles, you never get the disciples going, Jesus did all this to take place, what Joseph did, or what Joseph said, or what happened with Joseph. You never get that. You get it with David, you get it with Abraham, you get it with a lot of other figures, but you don't get it with him. And so the reason that is an important rule, is it prevents what I would call typology gone wild, where you're just making anything and everything about anything from the Old Testament. If the New Testament doesn't dictate it to us, it's not a good idea to do it ourselves. Now, you can say that Joseph had certainly like Christ-like character, but I'm not going to call him a prefiguring of Christ or a type of Christ, because he's never called that by the Bible. A lot of other people are. He's not. So, make sense? Those are the three rules. Let's move on to another one. Jesus, not Jesus, or Jesus and not Jesus. Chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. For unto us a child is born, and to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, and on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of Yahweh of hosts will do this. Raise your hand if it's Jesus.
If it's not at least Jesus, we got to rethink that song that we sing.
Not Jesus? Jesus and not Jesus? Ooh, it looks like you all got it right. It is Jesus. This one is just very clearly Jesus. There's no typology here. Yeah. I know that the angst that I put you through when I ask questions is really pretty special. This one is just about Jesus. It is a Messianic prophecy. There will be a child born, a government will rest upon his shoulders. He will be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government will increase with peace to no end, and he will sit on the throne of David. I mean, these are all prophetic things looking to that future time when Jesus establishes the kingdom once again and forevermore. Amazing. Amen. All right. Chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of Yahweh shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. Jesus, not Jesus, or Jesus and not Jesus. What do we think? You think not Jesus? Interesting. Jesus? Yeah? What about Jesus and not Jesus? Anyone want to vote for that? So we have one not Jesus. Anyone else not Jesus vote? That's interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, good. All right. Yeah? All right. Okay. So this is Jesus. This one is Jesus. And let me tell you why. Let me give you the clear, I think for me, defining reason why. Revelation 5:5. So I got one answer of maybe David. David is long gone at this point. So here we are. We have, and one of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the root of David. Root of David is also a root of Jesse. Jesse is David's father. So you have some of the same imagery being used here. Root, branch, roots shall bear fruit. This is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, Jesus himself, and none other. But I can understand the not Jesus vote, because it is a little bit unclear unless you have that. Isaiah 30, verse 6. We're jumping way ahead now. We have 15 minutes. I don't think we're going to get it done. There's no way. That's all right. We'll come back next time and finish all this. I've talked about this one before, but I think it's still an interesting discussion. We'll go from verse 6. An oracle on the beast of the Negeb, through a land of trouble and anguish, from where come the lioness and the lion, the adder and the flying fiery serpent. They carry their riches on the backs of donkeys and their treasures on the humps of camels. Let's talk about fiery flying serpent. Flying fiery serpent. What in the world is this? Dragons? Do we think so? So let me just give you a couple of options. certainly, you know my take here on dragons. I am unashamedly pro-dragon. I think that it's somehow like this, it's become this like Dungeons and Dragons myth, right? I mean, Leviathan is a dragon. You will fight me on it. Like, there's no question. He breathes fire, he has smoke, you can't pierce his skin with a javelin. Why are you throwing a javelin at anything, first of all? And second of all, it's impenetrable. Like, it sounds like a dragon, but that's neither here nor there. We have an interesting connection here. So we know that serpents, we've talked about this in the Old Testament already, serpents and Israel have a very tumultuous relationship. Why? They were dangerous, one, but even more than that, what sets them apart? So for there's this. Say again? Yeah, no, I mean, so whether they equated the serpent in Genesis with Satan is a little bit unclear, because the serpent is never described in Genesis as Satan. We don't get that until Revelation, where Satan is called the ancient serpent of old who deceives the whole world. Come on, it's very clear. But for them, I don't know that they were making that connection very clearly, because their whole theology of who Satan was very unclear. But what we do know is that their understanding of Genesis was built on the idea that everything in their world was destroyed in terms of shalom by a serpent. And from that point forward, their relationships with serpents are extraordinarily tumultuous. You get into the wilderness, God raises up these fiery serpents that bite and kill many thousands of them. I mean, it's a really rough go with ancient serpents in the ancient Near East, which were particularly venomous, adders especially, which is why there's great attention given in Revelation in the new heavens and new earth, where the infant and the adder lie down together and they play together like it's not a big deal. That was a real problem in the ancient world. Children often died as a result of these serpent bites. It was a major problem. And so we have that connection between Satan as a serpent, and then we also have this connection between Satan and angels. It seems like that's what he is. He comes into the gathering of God and the angels in Job. There's really not a lot of options in terms of what his build is, right? We know he's not human, which kind of leaves only one other thing, because we know he's not God. So he falls in this angelic category. Here's what's interesting about flying fiery serpent, is that the Hebrew word here is seraph, which is the word from which we get seraphim, which is a class of angel. So it's just an interesting connection. I don't really have anything more to say than that. Other than that, yeah, whatever these things were, they somehow had some kind of linguistic connection to the seraphim, and they fly, and they're fiery, which is, yeah, a strange thing for you to ponder on. Any questions on that? Thoughts to add to it?
I have a question, because my version says darting snakes.
Where's the... Yep, we got to get it on, because the people on mic, because the people on there they can't hear you. Whoa, perfect. Look at that bounce, redirect, love it.
Because my version says darting snakes, and seraphim seem, I think snakes seem awful slender. Mm-hmm. And to add wings to them, it's just something new. But then a seraphim seems much grander. Bigger? Yes.
Yeah. So it says what? Garden snake?
No, it says, hold on a second, darting.
Darting?
Snakes.
Like dart?
Yes.
Like to dart? So I will say the Hebrew word here literally means flying fiery serpent. So that might be there might be some reason for that's kind of trying to... So let me just say that Hebrew is a strange language, and it's not the easiest to translate. It's much more difficult than Greek. Greek has incredible precision. The way that it is built, it has great inflection in what it's trying to convey based on a whole number of changing parts morphologically. Hebrew is a very, it's a very simple language. And the problem with that is it leaves a lot of room for, like, what exactly was being intended here. So we talked about in Numbers, I think, the Azazel, if you remember that, which is sometimes translated as scapegoat in the New American Standard, Azazel in ESV, and there's some Jewish lore about a demon that lives in the desert, and that perhaps there was something going on there where one offering was being made to Yahweh with this goat, and the other is let go, carrying the sins of the people out where evil dwells. Not as an offering, but just to go out and be wherever the evil dwells, right? There is a tendency, I've noticed this, in a lot of the translations that we did in seminary. There's a tendency in translations to try and strip away some of the, like, stranger aspects of Hebrew. And so they may, and it sounds like they're changing it, and it's not that they're changing it. I'm sure there's very good linguistic reason for why they chose darting snake. There may be something in that. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I can't speak to that very clearly, but I'm sure there's some usage of that word somewhere where it indicated this kind of idea of, like, sudden movement. And so maybe they're thinking, yeah, that can be just an adder and a snake that attacks or moves quickly or something. I don't know. I do know that it's extremely difficult to overlook the root word here that is built on seraphim. And given the connection between Satan and serpents and angels, I just think there's something worth thinking about. It doesn't really change anything. I mean, I don't think that he's saying that, like, the adder and the dragons literally are, but I'm wondering if, like, maybe there is a genus of animal at this time, reptile at this time, that could be adequately described as this. I mean, we have no idea, right? It might be that there is something more weird and supernaturally going on here. I don't know. I have no idea. I do know that just, like, writing it off as, like, a snake is, I just think, an easy way out from dealing with the more difficult process. Same thing with scapegoat. New American Standard calls it a scapegoat. That is not what the word means at all. The problem is it's, in language studies, we call it a hapax legomenon. It means that it's only used this time. So we have in the body of work. So we have no way of measuring it against anything else. These are very difficult words for us because we have nothing to build on. So we're kind of just using context at that point. I can understand why a scapegoat might be utilized there, because it seems like they're putting their sin on this thing and sending it out as a scapegoat to kind of take the burden of that sin upon itself. But given what we know about ancient Jewish tradition and this Azazel figure, I think it's just lazy and cautiously safe to not at least talk about it. I'm not suggesting that I think those passages, like, this is what it means. I'm not going to build, like, a whole doctrine on that, but I think that part of the process of studying the Bible is working through passages that are challenging and accepting that there may be alternatives to this that are really weird, assuming they don't violate essential doctrine that's crystal clear in Scripture. And in these cases, it doesn't. And so why not? I mean, literally, you can read modern commentaries about Leviathan and Behemoth in Job, which sound strikingly like dinosaurs and dragons. And I have read this was a rhino and an alligator. I'm like, stop. Why? Like, why are we doing that? We're talking about the Bible. Like, this is 2,000 years ago. This was a crazy time. There were crazy things going on. 3,000 years, 4,000 years ago, when we're talking about Job. This was a long time ago. The world was weird, man. People were living 800, 900 years at one point. So it seems strange. Angels literally came down, had sex with women, and created a race of giants. Why is that any different than this? It's just like the battles that we choose. And so I don't know. I just think it is dishonest to not at least investigate that. Not build doctrine, not make huge truth claims, but to wonder a little bit. Let's go here just because the mic is here, and then we'll go back over to Bev. Yeah.
Well, I love to read, so I've read lots of things.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of literature from the Iron Age and those kinds of, that talk about dragons.
Oh, yeah.
And about how they sacrifice their virgins to dragons and all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
So historically, wouldn't it be possible that there actually were dragons? So why discount it?
Yeah, I think that, again, people might laugh at this. It's fine. It doesn't, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. It just seems extremely weird to me that there is so much historically about these creatures, and yet, and it's like with dinosaurs, we accept dinosaurs. Like, yes, we believe in dinosaurs. But we can't get our minds around dragons. And I don't understand why. People believe in the Loch Ness Monster, right? I mean, it's like, what is the difference? The difference is we have hundreds and hundreds of years of literature that suggest this. And so, again, I'm not going to write a book about it or make a big deal about it, but I just think it's kind of silly to write it off when there's something worth considering there. Yeah. Let's pass it over to Bev. We're going to have a relay again. All good. Let's hear it again.
The darting snake,
The darting snake.
yeah, if you look at 1429, that's what it was referring to.
14:20 of Isaiah.
Yeah,
14:29. Let's take a look and see.
it referred me over to there.
I like the investigation. 14:29. Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that struck you is broken. For from the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying, fiery serpent.
And it says darting here.
It says garden snake in yours?
No.
Oh, it says darting. I'm like, my
Darting.
gosh, it's getting worse.
It's a garden snake. It's not going to bother you.
That's the original, yeah.
Yours is
Just
just
a harmless little garden snake, cute little
Yours
garden
is
snake.
different than ours. That's where it refers to.
Yeah, well, so it's a word that it's found in a lot of places. Yeah, seraph is in there a lot. Let's see, do we have time for one? We don't have time, it's 8:14. So we'll come back next week. We will continue with Isaiah, and then maybe I will bring us back into chronological order. Let's talk about this for a moment. If you have 30 seconds to a minute. It's 2 days before Christmas Eve. You don't think we should? Anyone else? So I'm going to be here, so it's kind of I don't mind doing it, but I also don't mind taking a week off. We'll never finish the Old Testament if we keep doing this, but I'm here to serve you, not the other way around. What do we think? Do we want a week off for Christmas? Or do we want to keep moving? I think we keep moving. Yeah, I think we keep moving. We're going to have other groups. It'll be online if you miss it. If you want to take a week off, it's totally fine. And then you can just watch it online. It'll be fine. All right, glad we settled that. God bless you all. We'll see you.